that you're here today. We have a great presentation, and so I'm really excited to be presenting on this topic and really looking at the past 100 years of school lunch and really understanding why the school lunch is the way it is and why it's designed the way it is designed. And a part of that is just looking at why school buildings were designed the way that they are, why equipment in some places is scarce, and kind of looking at the policies that happened in the past that really shaped some of the challenges and even successes that we do have now in school lunch. And so I'll be co-presenting with Lisa Damon, who is our co-director at Mass Farm School, and she'll be talking more about the current policies and grants that are happening. And then we have Guy Koppe from Bridge Boston Charter School, who is the food service director there, and we're gonna talk about his career and his involvement in school lunch food. So we're really excited to have him here. And so we're going to go ahead and start, and I'm going to share my screen with everyone, and we'll be taking questions at the end. See my slide. There you go. So let me put this down. So we're going to start in the 1900s, where most children went home for their meals or bought stuff from street vendors like candy or pickles. But at this time, as more women gained the right to work, some home-cooked lunches became less reliable for many children. So in the 1910s, child hunger and malnutrition started to become a national concern in some places, and volunteer organizations began to step up to the task and provide meals for school children. And I just want to start off with saying that obviously there's a larger context going on racially with the country that is not really spoken about in these slides. We did adopt these slides from DC Greens, and they were so kind to kind of share all this work that they kind of design in these slides. So I just want to mention that there are some other contexts in US history that's happening at this time that's not necessarily mentioned, but just for the purposes of understanding specifically the concerns for school lunch, they weren't mentioned in these slides. So in our next slide, let me see if this lets me, here we go. In the 1920s, even more schools and or volunteer organizations started serving hot lunches. Students started to eat things like boiled meats, creamed vegetables, and bread. Schools started tracking students' health metrics for the first time and established home ec that taught girls to prepare nationally balanced lunches. Beginning of the modern cafeteria and kitchen setup started happening in this time, as there was an increase of needing to serve more and more students' lunches. So during the Great Depression, during the World War II, the government passed a law, the Agricultural Act of 1935, to buy excess crops, which we refer to as commodity foods, from farmers, and distributed those foods to low-income individuals, including students in schools. So this is a pretty big deal that this happened. We see traces of this still happening in school lunch now and other things like formula for kids. And so this was kind of a big hallmark of a law that's still affecting us now. So however, at the onset of World War II in 1939, food was redirected to the Army. President Truman in 1946 signed the National School Lunch Program into law. This program continued the practice using commodity foods in school meals. Schools got whatever foods the farmers needed to get rid of. And then in the 1950s, a massive population increase after World War II in the 50s, AKA the baby boom. School districts had to ramp up production in a big way. Post-war industry was also booming at this time. So schools were able to serve rich, protein-heavy dishes like cheese, meatloaf, sausage, shortcake, ham and bean scallop, cottage cheese, and orange coconut custard and ice cream. So this is also when like there was just very bizarre recipes happening in the school lunch menu. By 1952, school lunch had become big business, around $415 million spent on meals that year. And this is in the currency of that year. Private companies noticed this and started to approach schools for contracts to sell their food. So this is going to be a big game changer. In the 1960s, centralized kitchen facilities prepared meals for entire districts and shipped them to schools every day, meaning fewer schools were cooking meals on site. 1966, Lyndon Johnson signed the Child Nutrition Act, and it was funding for equipment, mandated that school lunches be nutritious. This was really the first law to acknowledge a link between healthy food and capacity of children to develop and learn. The CNA also started the school breakfast program. This was largely inspired by the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program, which started in Oakland in the 60s and served free breakfast out of churches across the city. War on poverty in the 60s, the government was largely devoting their resources to rural white America while ignoring urban communities of color. And so this is just an example, and there's a lot of understanding of Black Panthers and images of them with just guns and kind of being a ruckus in the community, but they actually had a ton of social programs in the community that largely doesn't get spoken about and actually had a huge impact in society. And this is kind of one of those programs. And then in the 1970s, under the Nixon administration, there were dramatic increases in funding for both the NSLP, the National School Lunch Program, and the School Breakfast Program. KFC and McDonald's set up shop inside school cafeterias. Remember, back in the 50s, we were talking about how it started to become big business, and so companies started wanting to partner with school lunches. So to try and compete with fast food, schools started adding hamburgers, French fries, and other greasy foods on their menus, which they would get federally reimbursed for. And so this is really where you kind of, again, start seeing this shift and really understanding why some school lunch in this modern context is shaped in this way. And then in the 1980s, the Carter administration created the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. These guidelines became the basis for today's school nutrition standards. Then Reagan was elected and cut a third of funding, over $1.5 billion across both NSLP and SDP, which is a breakfast and lunch program, and cut money for equipment, which is huge. So once there was no equipment, schools stopped building or remodeling kitchens. So oftentimes in some school buildings, even today, schools literally don't have kitchens or can't even have a kitchen, which creates a huge obstacle for doing farm to school or doing anything scratch cooking from the beginning, because they just don't have kind of basic needs in their building for this. So lunches increasingly were outsourced to private companies, and nutrition standards often took a backseat to the bottom line. Processed foods ruled the cafeteria: chicken nuggets, cheeseburgers, pizza, jello, canned syrup, fruit, etc. National standards were relaxed, no longer followed the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. Jam could be fruit, ketchup, a vegetable. Child obesity rates started to skyrocket. So the 1990s and 2000s, schools increasingly outsourced meals to food service management companies, and many still allowed fast food companies to sell food in the cafeteria. The Clintons launched the School Meals for Healthy Children, but the large funding cuts from the 80s meant that school kitchens were still not equipped to cook meals from scratch. By 2005, half of all US schools offered fast food in their cafeterias, with an even higher percentage carrying soda and snack vending machines. And I definitely remember that when I was younger. And then in 2010, Michelle Obama helped pass the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010. So major changes to school lunch included serving more in a wider variety of fruits and vegetables with breakfast and lunch, calorie maximums and minimums, healthier foods, whole grains, low fat and sodium options, healthy snacks, and more funding for equipment, $200 million, in food service staff, $9.5 million. By 2017, over 90% of schools across were getting onto these standards. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Lisa, and she's going to talk a little bit about some more of the current policies and how that shaped farm to school.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, so that was a really great summary of the history of of school food here in the United States, and I'm hoping to provide a little bit of just some current context of what's happening and what Mass Farm to School specifically kind of keeping an eye at what's happening at the federal level, but also here at the state level. Certainly, this is not an exhaustive look at school food policy. There's a lot happening here at the state level, but also at the federal level that can really take up a lot of time and just a lot of time and resources to get into. So I'm just going to brush the surface, and I know there's a lot of experts on the video here today that I'm happy to hear from during our Q&A to add to, and we could probably have some time at the end to really do some sharing. So I'm excited to look forward to that Q&A. And I also just want to encourage folks to put questions into the chat as they come up. I think probably after Guy gives his kind of real life perspective on what Teresa and I talked about, we'll have some nice time to delve into questions. So so as Teresa said, I'm gonna kind of bring it to current day and first look at the federal level school food policy, specifically the Child Nutrition Act Reauthorization of 2021. And this federal legislation is meant to be reauthorized every 5 years. But as Teresa said in the last slide, the Healthy and Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 was the last time this was looked at. So this is really what's happening now at the federal level, a once in a decade opportunity to influence school food policy. So I really looked to the National Farm to School Network to kind of do the research and dig into the details for us. And I know that a lot of you have your national networks that you rely on to get updates and information on. So this is just some of the pieces that we're keeping an eye on as it relates to farm to school, but we're really looking at a couple specific things that are potentially included in this reauthorization that would impact farm to school across the country, but also here in Massachusetts. One is the Farm to School Act of 2021, which would expand the current USDA Farm to School grant program, which is super competitive, and they know that, so they're hoping to expand that program and really deepen it across the country. Also looking to this reauthorization to support the Kids Eat Local Act, allowing for more local purchasing in districts across the country. The Local Schools Food Expansion Act, which would make currently a pilot program using unprocessed fruit and vegetables that's only happening in parts of the country, and expand that program and make it more permanent. And then also another one, look at a pilot to use procurement incentives for school meals and looking to make that more permanent. And then also we're looking at pieces of this legislation to expand school nutrition education and infrastructure. And Teresa, if you can go to the next slide, thank you. So then kind of narrowing it down to here in Massachusetts, which Massachusetts Farm to School is a little bit more steeped in state level policy. There's a couple pieces of legislation that are currently in the legislature that we're keeping an eye on, and one that was just passed this past October, which many of you are probably aware of, an act to promote student nutrition, and that aim to increase student access to preschool meals. It requires school districts to implement free breakfast and lunch for students if they meet the income eligibility criteria. And then it prohibits schools from using punitive measures against students with meal debt. So that one was recently passed in October. And then another one that our organization is supporting currently that's under review is the Universal School Meals Bill. And that looks to establish universal school meals for all students in K-12 schools here in Massachusetts. And that one, which is a big initiative led by the Feed Kids Coalition here in Massachusetts. Next slide, Teresa. Thanks. So then we also just a little bit about specific school farm to school policy history here in Massachusetts. We have a few bills that have passed kind of in the recent decade that we rely on to help provide momentum as we're going forward and looking at state legislature and statutes that have been passed. Looking back at 2010, there was a bill passed to promote state local purchasing, which requires agencies to purchase in state-grown products unless the price is more than 10% higher. And then more recently in 2016, a bill was passed largely by kind of rooted in a group of students on Martha's Vineyard to establish a farm to school month in October here in Massachusetts, and then also encourage the creation of a joint task force between Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, Department of Agricultural Resources, and Public Health to really look at farm to school as a cross-sector initiative at the state agency level. Next slide, please. And then just kind of bringing it up to the current day and also the most, I guess, farm to school focused bills that us as an organization are excited about is currently we're excited about a bill to establish a farm to school grant program here in Massachusetts that's currently with the Joint Committee on Education that will have a hearing on January 4th. And that would establish a competitive grant program within the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed to fund things like infrastructure, training, and education. And grants would go directly to schools or districts to fund those pieces and prioritize high needs districts and early care settings for those types of grants. And we estimate that they would be between $20,000 to $50,000 and be awarded on a competitive basis from the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So as that bill is heard and reviewed in legislature, at the same time, we're excited that through an amendment in the COVID recovery appropriations bill just recently signed by the governor, we're happy to see Senator Lesser submit an amendment to include $1 million of funding to jumpstart this grant program. So it was just signed, and I know that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is excited to get underway working on implementing and getting this program started to really get the money out the doors to the schools, doing exciting work to expand farm to school programming, start farm to school programming, and really deepening those connections happening across the school community. So look for more information, I'm sure, from DESE on that. And we're excited to see that program get implemented or that funding get spent, projects get underway to really build a case for establishing a permanent farm to school grant program here in Massachusetts. And so what's next? Just some things to keep an eye on. One, like I mentioned, the grant program from that will be implemented by DESE. More to come on that, I'm sure, next year as they get underway. And then also Massachusetts Farm to School is part of the Massachusetts Food for MA Kids Coalition, and we're excited about the hearing to support the Farm to School grant bill coming up on January 4th. So we're looking for folks to submit testimony in support of that bill and contacting your legislators to co-sponsor that bill as it's reviewed by the Committee on Education. Next slide, Teresa. And just to stay involved, mafoodformakids.org is the website for the Massachusetts Food for Massachusetts Kids Coalition. And that's really your best bet one-stop shop for all things farm to school policy here in Massachusetts. And it'll take you to all of those pieces of legislation and action items that I just went over. And I'll also drop that in the chat so that you can directly link to that website for those updates, and you can sign up for a newsletter to stay up to date on all of the policy related news happening here in Massachusetts. That's it.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for bringing us up to speed as to what's going on in the farm to school world and school lunches. And so next, I want to present our guest speaker, which I'm really excited. This school, Bridge Boston Charter School, is also part of our institute. And his name is Guy Koppe. He's a food service director. And Guy, if you can just start off with sharing a little bit of your work and how you got to be the food service director at Bridge Boston Charter School.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, thanks for having me here. And like you mentioned, I'm the food service director at Bridge Boston Charter School right now. and I've been there. This is my 4th year there. And prior to that, I was at Project Bread running the Chefs in Schools program. And I did a couple stints at Project Bread around school food. And then I was also a food service director in Watertown for a year. But I won't go too far back. That's pretty much my background. I did go to Tufts. I kind of transitioned from cooking in restaurants. I went to Tufts School of Nutrition and got a degree in food policy and applied nutrition. And that sort of catapulted me into the world of school food.
Great. And then what made you want to get into doing school food? I know when we were speaking, you kind of worked in fine dining for a little bit. So what made you want to transition?
Mostly it was my family, or even prior to me having a family, I wanted to sort of get out of the rat race of like working in fine dining restaurants, because it was all, working at night, and there was no time to really have like a Monday through Friday schedule that would fit in with having a family. So that's kind of how I ended up on this track. I think I always kind of thought, oh, I can't do this restaurant stuff forever, even though, I enjoyed it. But
And how do you
yeah,
feel it prepared you for all the work that you did at Project Bread and at the schools?
Tufts.
Well, just working in
How,
fine dining, Tufts, yeah.
oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it gives me a little bit different perspective. Just, I'm still working part-time doing some catering, and, it's just like touching food in a different way. And so you know, I would say to me, that's like a difference that I sort of imagine myself to have, in that I I consider myself more a service director, and the food service director bit is kind of comes afterwards, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then if you can share kind of a little bit in more detail of what you were doing at Project Bread and how you were working with other schools, and in what capacity and kind of resources you were sharing with them.
Sure. Yeah. We were like basically like consulting with districts. We sort of looked across the state, and given that we had chefs in different parts of the state, sort of both thought about, well, okay, where are our chefs in the state, and also where are those pockets of free and reduced students that we could work with. So it was really, I'd say, a combination of looking, a combination of taking the sort of staff resources that we had, and figuring out, based on that, where would be the best place to put a chef, thinking about the free and reduced percentages in different districts.
And what would you say were some of the biggest challenges that schools face from your experience working in that position? And what were some of the biggest success stories?
I think, speaking to like what you were talking to in your sort of timeline of school food, a lot of the districts, it was a real challenge to work in districts that didn't have the equipment, or didn't have the resources to be able to, like, if you could think about a dream kind of kitchen, or the equipment that you'd need to produce in an ideal world, uh, that wasn't, the case. And so we were sort of really, oftentimes we would really struggle to, like, oh, how can we adapt this recipe so, it would be as tasty as it could be, given the fact that we had a lot of like, restrictions, or not restrictions, but like a lot of things that were encumbering us from doing it exactly the way that we'd want to do it if we didn't have any sort of, if we had our own way with the kitchen we would be working in.
And what would you say, what were some like success stories during that time there that you saw?
I think, we had a lot of success in Salem. And it was just, that was one example. There was certainly other examples like Northampton. I know even now, Project Bread is having a lot of success there. But I'm going to speak to Salem because that's sort of the district that sort of pops to my mind when I think about successes that we had at Project Bread. And I feel like that was maybe in part, it was Deb Jeffers was the food service director there at the time. And she was just so open to having us in the district and really embraced the kind of change that we were sort of advocating for. And, I don't think, I just think maybe it was just the right time and right place kind of thing. But I feel like we made some real significant inroads. And I'm not sure it was entirely, I know it wasn't entirely Project Bread making those inroads, but I just think it was the combination of like Deb Jeffers being in the position that she was in, and us being able to offer a little bit of help where we could. But they seemed to really, move the needle a little bit in terms of upping the quality of lunch that they were serving, or school meals that they were serving there.
And then kind of transitioning into your position now at Bridge Boston, what have you dealt with? I mean, if you can speak to a little bit about kind of the dream of coming in and being able to fit your own kitchen, but also kind of what the challenges you've had to deal with during the pandemic and how that's kind of shifted how you were able to do your work.
Yeah, so the situation at Bridge Boston, it's been, yeah, you speak of like the dream there, like they were able to get $1 million grant to build out a kitchen there. So, that enabled us to really design the type of kitchen that we thought we'd need to feed all the students there. And
can you give a little bit more
really
details of what that was? Like what in your mind was the dream kitchen, and why did you pick that equipment? That might be helpful for some people if they're in that position.
Yeah, we have a tilt skillet. We've got 3 combi ovens, and the combi ovens are particularly helpful. We use those all the time. The tilt skillet is well, but I know they so when I went into the school, they had a plan for how the kitchen was going to be designed. And luckily I was able to go in and sort of make some changes to that plan. So like one of the things that they had planned for was like they had a grill. And I was like, oh, no. Like a grill is not really gonna help too much in school food production. So instead of that grill, could we, add another combi oven, or whatever the case may be. But like I said, the combi ovens are really helpful in that they're just a super versatile piece of equipment that you can do so many different things with.
Yeah, thanks. And then if you can, yeah, speak about your program, and then as COVID kind of emerged, did that shift anything? Did it create challenges, or did a lot of things stay the same?
Yeah, no, it definitely did not stay the same, which I'm sure is the same for all the folks on the call that are involved in school food service. We went from, serving a typical school lunch, in that, we have a cafeteria, and through 4 different sort of time periods, the different students would cycle into the cafeteria. We went from that to being closed for, I think 2 or 3 months. And then we did some work during the first sort of, onset of COVID. We did some farm to family boxes. We did some like sort of a made up program where we did like Blue Apron style meals, that families would have like a recipe in a box of food that they could, or 2 recipes that they would then, take that box of food home and be able to cook the recipes that we provided the ingredients for. So we did that for like 2 or 3 months. And then after that, we came back, and school was all remote. We came back in the fall, and the fall of, what was that, 2020, I guess. And school was all remote, but we started providing remote meals to families. So we basically rented a refrigerated van from Ryder, and we would do a box of meals to every family that wanted to participate, every week. So there would be a week's worth of school meals in that box, that we would, deliver out to the families.
And
And
what
then
did
we went,
the logistics of
I was
that
going to
look
say,
like?
just real quick, the logistics, that it was, I think the most challenging thing was figuring out a system for how to let folks know that their meals were like being delivered at the time they were being delivered, because we didn't, we couldn't logistically ring the doorbell and wait for an answer from the family. We had to, because we didn't have time to do that, to be able to sort of fit a schedule of delivering meals into 2 days a week, which is what we did. We needed to alert them via text message that their meals hit their doorstep. So every time you'd complete a delivery, you'd press a button on your phone, and the app on your phone would then send a message to the family saying, "Oh, your box of food was just delivered." So that was that, having that extra piece there, having that technology piece. It's kind of like Amazon, when your package comes from Amazon and it hits your porch. Like, that was the same technology that we're using, just an app to be able to say, "Oh, your meal box from Bridge Boston Charter School just hit your doorstep. So go down and grab it if you can."
And were these meals like pre-made? They just had to reheat them?
Yeah, and we'd have instructions on top of the meals, or in a sheet that we put in the box for like the different meals that were in the box. Then we'd have instructions on, "Oh, set your oven at 350 and cook it in there for, a half an hour or whatever until it reaches a certain temperature."
Yeah, that's awesome. I love Blue
Yeah,
Apron.
and they were
Very Blue Apron-ish.
primarily frozen.
Okay. Very cool. And did you want to say anything else about kind of the transition of that in COVID, and maybe coming out of, well, we're not really out of COVID, but when school started coming back on full time, particularly this year?
So one of the big changes that we've made this year has been like insulated boxes, and we were doing this a bit last year too, once the students. So last year, eventually some of the students came back and others remained remote. And so at that point, we bought all these insulated camera boxes, and we started shuttling the meals that we were producing in the cafeteria out to each of the classrooms. So no longer do students eat in the cafeteria. Unfortunately, they're all holed up in their classroom, and we provide kind of everything that they would need to eat a school lunch, but in their classrooms. So that's been the big change this year, is, you know, managing, just figuring out how to remotely serve all these kids while they're in the school and not able to eat in the cafeteria.
And is this still the case now, even today?
Yeah, I mean, we have one classroom that comes down to the cafeteria, but other than that, they're all still remote. They're all eating in their classrooms.
And then as we wrap up this portion, and I'm going to open it up so that people can ask questions, is there anything else you want to share about your experience, any words of wisdom, any encouragement to other food service directors or other people to gain understanding of the work that food service directors are dealing with?
I mean, no, you know, COVID is really, it's like you go through the process, and, you know, each step of the way you're doing something different, and it feels crazy, but I felt like, you know, it's been a good experience in retrospect, maybe not in the middle of it. And I guess we're still sort of in the middle of it, but it feels a little bit better now, you know, than it did when we were like driving the meals all around, because that was a little bit crazy. Yeah, and one of the major challenges that we had was like just dealing with Ryder. I mean, they were really tough to deal with, and eventually they got so tough to deal with that we just like said, see you later, and we contracted with a catering company that I actually work part-time for. And so the catering company was, because they were in the middle of COVID too, so they didn't have any business, and they were happy to deliver the meals for us. So like they didn't cook any of the meals, we cooked them, but they delivered them. And having that, you know, just being able to switch gears like that and have them deliver the meals was super helpful, because, you know, at some point, like the frustration was so, we were just like, we can't deal with Ryder anymore. And just having that other outlet there was really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I used to deliver CSA shares all over the city, so I feel the pain and the struggle of dealing with
Yeah, I
traffic in
mean,
like small roads in Boston and being in a van and
yeah,
crowd.
trying to get a van around. Yeah, and that was one of the things too. Like we knew we couldn't get a box truck to do it, because, you know, driving around Dorchester and Roxbury and all those like tight streets and stuff, like we knew that a box truck we'd get stuck a lot of times, you know. So we ended up with a Sprinter van, both from Ryder, and then when we transitioned to Gourmet Caterers, they had a Sprinter van, a refrigerated Sprinter van that they were driving around the neighborhoods with.
Yeah.
So it's much more manageable.
Yeah, it is. That's great. And then I see Lisa, you have your hand raised. Are we gonna open up the Q&A so Lisa can start?
Thanks. I had never used that option, but I figured it was a good chance to do so. Guy, I'm just interested to hear your perspective. You know, you had this when you're at Project Bread, an opportunity to see how other districts worked and work closely with them. And then being at Bridge Boston through the past couple of years during the pandemic, when there's obviously been a lot of change to school food, both like policy-wise and on the ground-wise, as you just described all of the shifts you had to make and how you operationalize it. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about school food in general, kind of as we're coming out of or like, you know, as we're normalizing a little bit of takeaways, I guess, looking for silver linings in challenging times of like, you know, you would like to see school food go in this direction or continue to do X, or wow, that really taught us like we never want to do that again. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts of future school food and policy or operations?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure my thoughts are like so much influenced by the pandemic, or, you know, I find it sometimes frustrating, that there's so many regulations put on top of school food that, sometimes it's tough to be able to just be in a kitchen and be cooking. Sometimes I feel like, oh, you're always, sort of worried about the regulations and how the particular meal you're cooking fits into the programs. Um, I mean, yeah, I would say that's, for me, that's the biggest challenge, is just like feeling like, you can cook a meal that it feels good, that is going to be appreciated by the students, but at the same time that meal also is meeting the USDA guidelines and, doing everything it needs to do in terms of that. That to me is the biggest challenge, that me and all other food service directors across the state are sort of, faced with.
Thank you. And I just want to not forget, Lori had asked a question, and maybe Lisa, you can answer this, but she asked, by what mechanism does the law require local purchases? Is there required reporting, incentive, consequences for not?
Yeah, I just opened, I think Lori signed off, so I can't ask or verify what piece that she was asking about, but I think she may have been talking about the state legislation that requires state agencies to buy or preferentially purchase in-state produce unless it's 10% higher. And that's a really great question slash point, that there are no mechanisms for collecting that data and enforcement. And so I don't know how widely it is used and frankly enforced. And if anyone else on the call has better information, I'm happy to open up the floor to them, but I don't know of a way that that information is collected or enforced at the state agency level. So it has maybe eased some, created opportunity for allowance, but not necessarily provided real incentive to start using it and enforcement of that past legislation.
Okay, great. And then everyone can unmute now. So if you guys have a question for Guy or Lisa, feel free to unmute, or you can write it in the chat box. Guy, so what do you see yourself, where do you see charter school going the next 5 years with farm to school work?
We've been really blessed in terms of farm to school work, in that we're working with Gaining Ground Farm in Concord, and they're basically giving us, I don't know, 15 to 20 banana boxes, like the size of a case of bananas. So 15 to 20 case boxes of fresh produce a week while they're, while the food is in season. Obviously, we're not getting anything now, but come like May, the 1st of May, they start delivering stuff to us. And that has been just amazing. Just like, they're so amazing to have all that fresh produce, and it gives us like some flexibility in terms of, how we menu different things, and just being able to sort of take the vegetable side of things. We sort of play it by ear based on what we're getting every week from Gaining Ground. So, I mean, that's been a blessing for real. I mean, it's unbelievable.
And I think you had mentioned when we were speaking that there's also field trips to the farm. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, well, we weren't doing them in sort of the heart of COVID over the last 2 years, but prior to COVID, we did maybe 3 or 4 field trips. And then this year, the school is planning to have 3 or 4 field trips that go out to, to the farm, and the kids get to learn all about the operation of the farm, and they get to do some different farm chores sort of thing, where they might be picking carrots, or they might be, washing greens, or seeding some things, or whatever, depending on when exactly they're visiting the farm. But I think it's really powerful for the kids to both have the experience of, going to the farm and seeing how the food is grown, but then also coming back and being able to see, all that food being used in the cafeteria. And if we can, remind them that, oh, we're making the carrots from Gaining Ground Farm that you guys just, help pick. And, that's really exciting for the students. So it's great.
That's great. And then Chef Catherine, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting today. It's been phenomenal to listen to you. And cheers to everyone surviving the pandemic and still serving and still made it on the other end. I just have a question for you. So, I work for Boston Public Schools, and we are fortunate enough to be, we have a little funding from the Kendall Foundation for locally sourced fruits and vegetables. And do you see, I would love to start talking about how, I love that you're bridging the gap between the farm and educating the students about where those vegetables are coming from, because I find that there's so many students out there that think that cucumbers come from the supermarket, and they don't know that it comes from the ground. And I'm just curious, do you see any opportunities, or, because I would love to start teaching culinary classes, bridging that food service worker as an educator and a food creator with the students learning, within after school programs, or within bringing, almost bringing home ec and stuff like that, taking a class, where can we put culinary, nutrition and culinary teachings to kids, just basic little, either after school or during school. I don't know if that's an idea that also is here as well.
Yeah, you can answer if you have anything, but Lisa, if you can share, I know there's some schools out there doing some really great work. So either one can answer.
Yeah, I certainly have anecdotally heard of different models happening across the state. And what it looks like depends on the district, and if they can fit it into the school day as part of a health class or whatnot. If Teresa, I feel like you and I just heard about mobile kitchens? We were on a recent meeting, and someone was talking about the mobile kitchen carts. They bring it around to the classrooms and do a little cooking demo or interactive lesson with the kids in the classroom. But after school can be a great place for that type of work too. So I'm happy to, Catherine, if you want to connect after the meeting, I'm happy to try to figure out, if there's other folks in districts that you can connect with to see the different models. I'm happy to help you look a bit more into that. And maybe Guy, because of your work with Ridge Boston, but also Project Red, you may know some great examples too, where they're doing that. I'm not sure.
I was thinking of Ellen Nyland too, who partnered with a marketing teacher, and they did a really cool programming together, and kids kind of cooked in the cafeteria, and then they also thought of different ways to market it. So I think there's a lot of creative outlets out there.
That'd be great. I would love to talk offline if you guys have, or maybe if you guys are all your emails, maybe just shoot some ideas, because it would be great to get it either for the spring or even started in maybe even a summer program.
Yeah, I know one of the things that we are planning on doing this year is 4 separate sessions where we invite parents and students to come back, and it probably will be small. It might be 12 people, but they would be invited to come in the afternoon or at night and come into the kitchen, and we do a specific recipe or whatever with that group of students and parents. So that's something that we're looking forward to kind of venturing into this year.
That's awesome. Congratulations. I think it's so important to take what we're learning in school and bring it home too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been actually, it's funny because my bosses have been pushing that, and I just think it's, you have a pandemic, different things are happening, you're trying to build a program, and we just never got to it. But hopefully this year we're going to actually tick that box and get that program off and running, because it's been something that we've wanted to do for a while.
Awesome, thank you. Is there any other questions from anyone else? You have opportunity to ask either Lisa or Guy. And as we wrap up, if there's no other questions, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today in this session. And Guy, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're incredibly busy. And Lisa for also joining us today. And just as a heads up, there are some sessions coming up next year. Hopefully there'll be a procurement class and session and workshop happening sometime in the winter time. And then in the spring, we have a farm to breakfast with Project Bread. So they'll be doing a live demo and a recipe, which will be really fun, and some other great workshops. So please stay in touch with Farm to School and look out for their upcoming workshops. And again, thank you so much for coming today, and I'd like to stay in touch, and happy holidays for everyone if you celebrate. So thank you. Thank you, Guy. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.